Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the C.I.C. Lounge. I'm Peter.
I am Jen.
And today we're taking a step away from Star Trek and we're going to do a review on a movie from 1980 called The Final Countdown.
So this movie is something that was very important to my husband. He saw this movie when he was young, and I think it had an influence on his choice to join the Navy. I did not see this movie until only recently, like a couple of years ago. So it had no influence on my decision to join the Navy. But having watched the movie, I can understand why the Navy used this as a recruitment tool.
Oh, 100%. The first 5 minutes of this movie, it feels like nothing but a recruitment video for being a naval pilot.
Yeah.
I mean, it... Oof.
So the premise of this film is that it's 1980, and at the time the Nimitz was less than 10 years old. The film was shot on the USS Nimitz. I have not been on the Nimitz, but I've been on the Nimitz. I served on a Nimitz class carrier, so they all look about the same. So it's 1980, and the ship is underway, and it somehow goes through some sort of storm that turns into some sort of time portal. And they're transported back in time to the day before the attack on Pearl Harbor. And then eventually they sail back into a storm and they travel back. And when I say that's the story, I mean, that is it.
That is pretty much it.
Like, I remember we watched the film last week, and I turned to my husband after the film and I said, "Who's the protagonist? Who is the main character? Who is the lead? Who are we rooting for? Because
and who's the antagonist? There is no antagonist.
The guy who gets the girl in the end is not the guy we see in the beginning of the film. It's the CAG who comes in later. So it's like, all right, well, he's not, and it might be the captain, except they're playing with Martin Sheen's character, the Lasky character. You know, I'm watching this film and I'm like, I have no idea who the main character... The Nimitz is what I came up with. The Nimitz is the main character of this movie. The Nimitz goes back in time, and the Nimitz then goes forward in time. Like, that's it. It doesn't really have much of an adventure. There were elements where they really could have played with what happens if we change the timeline, and I think in many ways the captain made... What I think in what a naval captain would do under these circumstances, made all the right decisions. Well, we're back in 1941, and I have this ship, and my job is to defend the United States. So we're going to try and stop this attack on Pearl Harbor until the time portal opens up and is like, no, we're going home. Never mind.
Yeah.
Like...
just randomly opens up right before they could do anything.
But like that question of should we or shouldn't we, you know, is this a fixed point in time? Should we be messing with the timeline just because we're here, you know, and maybe we're here for a reason? Like, those questions weren't really asked.
No.
They spent most of the movie just trying to figure out where are we and what are we doing here and what happened and what are these strange radio signals we're getting and why are there Japanese Zeros flying around? Like, it took them a long time to figure out where they were and what was going on, and then they didn't do anything. And then you have this senator character who comes in who's just like a bull in a china shop, just throwing his weight around like he has any kind of power or authority over this military command. No.
I mean, yeah, like watching this movie. So I watched it for the first time 2 days ago, and it was rough.
Yeah,
it was rough to watch. It's super, super slow to begin with. There's no real explanation of what's going on. You're not being drawn to one thing. In the ads or in the trailer, it's basically like the top of the line, state of the art vessel gets sucked back in time to 1940 and blah, blah, blah. And there's no indication that this is a, you know, highly sophisticated, top of the line, technologically advanced vessel of any kind. They spend no time pointing out anything or explaining anything. Like, even with the opening credits, they could have easily shown people working on munitions, people getting the planes ready, the lift bringing a new jet up to take off for a mission. Nothing. They did none of that. And there's just like, I sat there for the first 5 minutes going, what is this? What is this about?
Yeah, the Martin Sheen, because it's got Kirk Douglas, it's got Martin Sheen, so it's got some A-list talent, young at the
Yeah.
time, but still, because this movie came out in 1980. But like Martin Sheen's character is a defense contractor, but they don't really say why he's there, what his purpose is. But he's
Yeah.
and it's not uncommon, to have civilian contractors come aboard ship carriers. I mean, I was there, I saw them, for whatever reason they're there to do any number of things. They just in this movie don't say what he's there for.
Yeah.
But he's always on the bridge or he's always following the captain around. And that is a bit unusual, because contractors are usually there for something very specific that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with a commanding officer. Usually it's like with a munitions thing or an engineering thing or whatever.
Yeah.
They're testing equipment or protocols or whatever. It's So his character, his purpose for being there was never really explained.
No, not at all. We don't really know who he works for, what he's doing, why he's there. Like, he's there to be an observer so that he can take the information back to his company and say, hey, we need to make these alterations. Now, but it's like, do we change what the soldiers are doing, what the officers are doing, what the grunts are doing, or are we changing what the ship is doing?
I can say, having served in the U.S. Navy from 99 to 2005, very little has changed aboard a Nimitz-class carrier since 1980, when that film was, because it was it was shot in 79, and the aircraft changed somewhat. Or have since 1980, the aircraft have changed, and so from 1941 to 1980, when this was filmed, the aircraft was the major innovation. Obviously, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and the steam catapults and all that, like that, those were elements, but like basic ship design hadn't really fundamentally changed since World War II. Just some of the technological elements, the radar elements, the flight elements, that was the edge. And in fact, I was reading about some of the behind the scenes stuff that took place. So this film was shot over 2 5-week periods on the Nimitz, and some of the the aircraft shots, this is before CGI. This is, these were all real. They were all done practical in camera. And so these World War II Japanese planes, these Zeros, have no speed compared to jet engines of 1980, And there's actually one shot or one sequence where like the one of the jets comes up in front of the Zeros, and the backwash from the jet engines just totally, like, one guy lost his radio and glasses. Like, they totally lost control of their Zeros just from the backwash alone.
In the behind the scenes?
In the behind the scenes,
Okay.
So the pilots had to scramble to regain control of their Zeros for this effect, this stunt shot, and because they'd lost their headset, like the pilots flying these World War II planes couldn't like say, stop, we're in trouble or anything like that. So it was kind of precarious. But when you're talking about like the difference between 1941 and 1980, the biggest is probably in aircraft design and aircraft and what those planes could do. So could one single United States aircraft carrier today or in 1980 take on the whole of the Japanese fleet in 1941? Probably.
Yeah.
I think because of the capabilities of the aircraft, and that's an aircraft carrier, it has some defensive capabilities of its own, like C.I.C and stuff like that, but its primary defense is the air wing. So it's the airplanes that go off, and because these things are faster, more maneuverable, and the bombs pack a bigger punch, they could strike more easily at the Japanese fleet. So there was a potential to change the outcome, and I think the story would have been more interesting if they'd spent more time trying to change history and see what that world would look like when they came back, and then have a sequel movie where you go back and undo it if you don't like the circumstances or not. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the actual story they went with is basically a Navy recruitment ad, because for me, it was very nostalgic because it's like, ah, yes, that's exactly what carrier life is like. I mean, obviously, like some minor decor had changed in the crew messing areas, and some of the sailors when I was in weren't wearing dungarees anymore. They were wearing a slightly different uniform. But the call and response, the repeat backs, like they had all of those extras were members of the Nimitz crew at the time.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
yeah, so there was a lot of authenticity in Navy procedure and protocol when captain's on the bridge, captain's off the bridge, and all of the repeat backs and the communications between the bridge and the C.I.C. and the different parts. You will notice there's no mention of the engine room, nothing,
No, not
because it's
once.
nuclear powered. They would not have been allowed to film down there. So I was kind of bummed about that, but I certainly
that's where you
understand
worked.
because that's where I worked. But I can certainly understand why that wasn't included. So you get all the fun stuff up top. But one of the things that was also happened while they were filming this is there's a scene where a plane is in distress and it's coming into the flight deck and there's something wrong. Can't remember what the problem was.
The hook.
The tail hook or something.
Yeah,
They
the
couldn't
hook
engage.
was stuck. It wasn't engaging.
Yeah, they couldn't engage the tail hook. So you see the crew set up the barricade. Now I've seen them set up the barricade for drills several times, but this was a real casualty on the ship when the film crew was there, and they let the film crew film it because you will drill this, but you really don't want to ram an aircraft into the barricade because it usually damages the plane.
Yeah.
So for drill purposes, it's just they'll set up the barricade and simulate a plane coming in, but a plane doesn't normally come in and crash into the barricade unless it's an actual emergency.
So this was an actual.
So this was an
emergency.
actual emergency while the film crew was out, where they had to set up the barricade. And I mean, obviously, it worked like it was supposed to. But
Yeah, and they used the footage.
And
That's
they-
really cool.
use the footage in the final cut. So
Took the opportunity and ran with it.
yeah. So one of the other things that personally I found interesting is like I was watching as the CAG, who's the commander of the air group. He's like in charge of the air wing, and there's an emblem on his uniform that's it kind of looks like an infinity symbol, but it's an 8. And
okay, now I remember.
and that is the symbol for Air Wing 8. So aircraft carriers will go out, and there's a number of different air wings that the Navy has. And these air wings move around different carriers depending on their workup and the mission and whatever. So depending on what's going on, a carrier can go underway, and they'll take Air Wing 2 with them for Air Wing 2 to get reps and sea time or whatever. But when a carrier deploys, it usually takes a single air wing with them. So when I was deployed on the USS Enterprise in 2001, Air Wing 8 was the air wing assigned to us. So
Cool.
I'm watching this film and I'm like, I recognize that air wing symbol because I saw it every day when I was deployed with the Enterprise.
Nice.
So it was kind of like I felt like a connection, not from a filmmaking or story standpoint, but for me, this film was very nostalgic and like, yes, this reminds me so much of what it was like when I served, because very little had actually changed from 1980 to 2000 when I was serving. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Well, I have never served in the military, so it had no hold on me. But that's kind of cool to hear that little story that you actually got to interact with the real
Oh, yeah.
air wing.
As much as a nuclear operator interacts
Yeah.
with the air wing, but yeah, that was the air wing, attached to us at that time.
Yeah. So moving along with the movie, obviously, I like the entire time I felt like this was just a major propaganda, or not propaganda, but recruitment movie. But when they end up shooting down the 2 Zeros that shoot and destroy the luxury boat that's just chugging along, they get one of the pilot that survived. They get him on board, and I don't know, like, tell me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't they have cuffed him?
I would think so.
And wouldn't they have had more than one Marine watching him?
And wouldn't that Marine have better security over his weapon? Yeah.
Because for those of you who've never seen this movie,
Why are you watching this review?
So the prisoner takes a moment. For some reason, he's in the same med bay as the senator and his assistant that they pull from the water as well. And he takes a moment of the dog distracting everybody to hit the Marine in the stomach, disarm him, kill him with his own weapon, kill the other Marine that was about 5 feet away, and then holds everybody hostage. I'm just thinking to myself, one, why is this man not cuffed? And two, why is he in the same room as the senator and his secretary? And three, why is he not in the brig? You can ask him questions in the brig.
Right. It didn't make sense that he would be questioned in medical.
Yeah.
If he were receiving medical treatment, it would make sense that they'd be in the same place because there is one medical area of the ship. On a carrier, so that would make sense. But because he's a prisoner, you would assume. But it's one of those things where this could also be a timing issue because this is a Japanese character from 1941 whose sworn enemy is the United States. But in 1980 it was a very different world, and so their perception of this guy a man out of time, they and the Japanese aren't a threat in 1980. Yeah. So to them, they don't really see him as the enemy. He's just a guy in a plane from the past, not recognizing or really realizing that this guy doesn't know the difference. This guy has no idea what's going on, and he certainly doesn't speak your language. So,
yeah, they make it very clear that the Cold War is a thing. As the Nimitz is leaving Pearl Harbor, they see a trawler, a Russian trawler, and they make several comments about the Russian trawler.
Yeah,
several times. So
yeah.
But yeah, so the whole hostage situation was just beyond me. There could have been 1,001 better ways to do that scene or portray that scene. So I wasn't a big fan of that. And again, the movie just moved so slow at times.
Well, it felt like it moved slowly because it wasn't moving anywhere.
Yeah.
When we talk about story and structure as writers, we talk about how your principal character, your protagonist, has to change, has to be transformed by the events of the story. That's what makes compelling storytelling. So that's why I turned to my husband. I was like, who's the protagonist? Who changes? Who is fundamentally altered by the events in this? And the only person that's really altered is the CAG, only because he's left behind in 1941, not by his own choice. So that's not really the kind of arc transformation we talk about in storytelling. The captain's the same in the end of the movie as he is in the beginning. Martin Sheen character doesn't change at all. He's the same in the beginning as he is in the end.
The relationship at the end when the captain sees Sheen's character off the ship, he's just like, you've been a pain in my ass, but I'm gonna miss you, buddy. It's like you guys. There was no moment where in the 24 hours you guys were out to sea and lost in time that you guys became friends. Yeah. No way. And then at the end of the movie, we see that the CAG, he was stranded on an island with the senator's secretary. Oh, and the senator mollywopping some poor guy in the head, knocking him out, grabbing the flare gun and taking the helicopter hostage.
Yeah.
And then they struggle with it. He pulls the trigger and the whole thing blows up. I'm sorry. What?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe the flare hit something. I mean, there's not like it's a whole lot of protection on a helicopter. Maybe there was a fuel tank or some extra gas lying around that ignited. I don't know. I was looking at that. I'm like, well, I'm not sad he's dead.
No.
But they had talked about it. Like that
he
man
mysteriously
disappears at on that day. So I'm like, well, history seems to be carrying on like it's supposed to. Time is writing itself as it's going, whether you're Final Destination or not. But but yeah, and of course there's the forced love story.
Yeah. Oh my god! And when I saw him go into after everybody died and the CAG takes the Laurel was her
I
name.
don't
I think her
remember.
name was Laurel. Takes Laurel back into the room that she was supposed to be in. Uh, he's like talking to her, and the music kind of changes and it's nice and soft. I was fully expecting, because it was 1980, that there was going to be that moment where they lock
Oh
eyes and they end
yeah.
up kissing, and it's just like this forced romance. And I was just like, oh, thank you for not doing that. But still, you can tell that that's where the director and the writers were wanting to take this. And so they forced it in there with the two of them being stranded on this island. And subsequently, he's now stranded back in time. So when we see him at the very end, 40 years later, he's got old person makeup on. And it's just like, come on, really?
Well, that was the only closed loop, like it in the story. And my husband then pointed out that when they get in the car and they drive off, they're going to drive off the pier because the car's pointed in the wrong direction. It's literally driving to the end of the pier. Like, you should back up and kind of go the other way because that's where
Right.
the parking lot is. That's where the roads are. But no, they just start driving and
Yeah.
drive right off the pier.
Sheen's character gets in the car, and the CAG sits there and he goes, "We've got a lot to catch up on." What do you have to catch up on?
I think I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you went back in time. You were stuck.
You get stranded,
and
so
you used your knowledge of the future to make a lot of money, which is what any one of us would do.
I would do
Yeah,
that.
hell yeah, hell yeah.
I don't know much, but I'd do what I could.
Right, right.
Yeah. So this movie, the concept, like we've talked about several times, Man Out of Time, it has a lot of potential. They could have done so much with this, but at the end of the day, with this movie, all I could see was it's a shitty attempt at a Navy recruitment movie.
Well, I think the unfortunate thing is that it's such a rare thing to get this level of cooperation from the military for a movie, you know. And back then it was probably easier than it is today for security reasons and other things. So to have that opportunity and to really not have a story, you have a concept. We go back in time to 1941. Okay, well that's interesting. What do? We just do donuts in the water until the portal opens up again, and then we come back.
Yeah,
That is all they did.
that's
Like,
all they did.
They launched a few airplanes. They did shoot down 2 zeros. Not that makes a difference,
Lick a difference.
you know. But they never. By the time they figure out where they're at and what's going on, it's the end of the movie. It's
Yeah.
time. It's time to go. Like, okay, we're gonna launch. We're gonna go attack. You know, and the captain recalls the birds. You know, and one of the choices he could have made instead was, well, the carrier was getting pulled back. Like, it was getting pulled. They kept
every time
they tried to
turned,
make a
it
course
followed
correction, the portal kept pulling them in. But the aircraft didn't necessarily, or they never said whether the aircraft were affected in the same way. The aircraft could have gone off and wreaked havoc on the Japanese fleet, and then they would have been left in time too. But maybe that would have been something interesting.
Yeah.
And so then this carrier goes forward without its air wing and comes to a future that's completely different, completely altered. And I think you could have ended the movie there, like in this dystopian or just different United States, because the effects of that day had a different outcome. And what would that outcome look like? Like, I really think that in the writing, they could have played with that. But I don't know that they would have taken risks like that in 1980. And
No, not 1980.
you know, and I don't know how much influence the Navy had on this script, on the final cut, with their cooperation, or if they had any. I don't know. But there, over and over again, as I watch this film, like, there is no story here. There's no story. Nothing changes from beginning to end, and nothing interesting happens in the middle either. A lot of talking heads, a lot of running around trying to figure out what's going on.
There were several times I had to catch myself because I started picking up my phone and playing video games on my phone. I had to be like, oh, no, I need to pay attention. The whole time thing, you know, so is time linear? Are we in a new dimension? Because, you know, the concept of time going, you know, you travel back in time and now you've created a brand new branch of time. So anything you do holds no bearing on your original time.
Right.
So they could have just screwed everything up, or done whatever they wanted to do, and everything for their timeline would have been fine because they're in a different timeline. But I guess that'd be just too much to go into at that point in, the 1980 when the movie came out. It might have been
Right.
too deep.
And I think about. I mean, this movie predates me. I wasn't alive in 1980, so I can't speculate as to what life and culture in the United States was like in 1980. But I don't know if science fiction was at a point where they could have really pushed that envelope with diverging universes and multiple timelines, and
I think it would have been a little too much.
If an American audience would have been able to be held by that. Mainstream, obviously anyone in the sci-fi world's used to hearing that kind of stuff, but and that's what this was a mainstream movie. I think it had like a $12 million budget and it made 16 million globally, so it wasn't a complete flop. It wasn't like a smashing success, but I do know that posters from this movie were hanging in recruiting offices all over the country after it came out. So
that does not surprise me. That's pretty funny.
No.
Well, I don't think I'll ever watch this movie again.
I don't blame you. There's no story.
No.
There's, I don't think I will see this movie again. I think my husband might, because
well,
just from that Navy nostalgic aspect. Because
thanks to your husband, this is why I've now watched this movie. It's because it was his suggestion to do this.
Yes.
So, yeah, we'll have to have a sit down.
Well, we seem to be having a theme of time travel movies.
No, that's true.
We did Demolition Man.
Demolition Man, and that is a man at a time.
So this is a aircraft carrier out of time.
Yeah. There's a lot of potential with the movie. I just think that they could have done 1,001 things, and any one of those things could have made the movie better.
Any one of those things.
If they'd done them all, it probably would have been a great success. But looking at this movie, I can't help but think that it was kind of a precursor to Top Gun.
Yeah.
Because Top Gun was an excellent recruitment movie.
Oh, definitely.
It was a great movie. It has...
You had a flawed main character who undergoes a transformation. Yeah, you had a story.
But you had an actual story.
Yeah.
You followed this one individual's growth through this movie, and everybody loved it. And of course, Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise. So it's just like, yeah, we freaking love this movie.
Yeah.
But with the final countdown, what are we counting down to? Are we counting down to the Day of Infamy? I mean, they did say that a lot. Like in the opening credits, they rolled that speech of his.
Yeah.
So maybe this was destined to happen, and that's why they got sucked back and then taken back to their own time. They couldn't resist getting pulled into the vortex. I don't know. But it was definitely a movie.
If you've ever served in the military, if you've ever served in the Navy and want a film that's gonna make you feel nostalgic for shipboard life, this is gonna meet that, because like I said, I really think the Nimitz is the protagonist, because we see a lot of carrier life. I mean, all over the ship. Oh, maybe not all over the ship, not in the engine room, but you see the messing areas, you see parts of weapons magazines, moving weapons around, hangar bay, flight deck, bridge operations, C.I.C. So you see all of that. C.I.C., which is where our title comes from, the Combat Information Center. So I don't know that we've ever explained that to our audience.
I think we did with the first episode.
Did we?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know.
I hope
Maybe
so.
not. Well, the C.I.C., now you know.
Now you know.
Command Information Center.
All right.
Anyway, well, yeah. So it was a movie. It was made and it was watched. That's all I got to say.
Go Navy.
Well, thank you all for putting up with us and watching another episode of the C.I.C. Lounge. My name is Peter.
I am Jen.
And we'll see you next time.